Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of the Commercial Real Estate 101 Meetup Group. Excited to see you all this afternoon. Today, we have the honor of having a good buddy of mine and a recurring guest on the show, Lindsey. We're going to be talking about construction management as a whole and kind of just pick his brain a little bit on the process of it. And also, he's got a wide range of experience in the construction space, which I think is going to be super valuable for us today. So, Lucas, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, for sure. And for those of you guys who are listening, and maybe if you haven't had a chance to check out our previous episode, we talked about adaptive reuse, and he did a phenomenal job kind of explaining the nuances of that. He's obviously had a lot of experience in that front. But Lucas and I went to college together, and we were just talking offline just now about several other of our friends who are now in the commercial real estate space that we're now just kind of running into in the industry. So it's
amazing. Cool. It's a small world, and it's cool to follow people's stories and see what they're working on.
Yeah,
I have to admit, I feel honored to come on a second time. It feels like an SNL host who gets to have their sophomore debut.
I've been trying to get you back on for a while, more so just for because I know you can provide so much insight, and really I did appreciate your take on sharing information about adaptive reuse, because I've had people reach out to me about that particular episode.
That's awesome.
So
that's a passion of mine.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I know. And we'll have to, at some point, as we've said, commercial real estate does not have borders. So I truly believe that at some day in the future, our paths will cross.
Many industries under one title.
Yeah. Exactly. So really, as you know, with this podcast, we make it topic specific. Main reason is that we like to make sure that, throughout the discussion, that people can extract as much value as they can about a particular subject that we talked about today. Today, we wanted to focus on the construction management piece. So if you could kind of, first off, before we get into the nitty gritty of that, could you kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and kind of share a little bit about your story?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I've been working in construction and real estate since about 2010. I think, we touched on this a little bit on the first episode that I was on, but coming out of ASU, Arizona State, I met up with a startup development shop in Phoenix called Venue Projects. They took me on as an intern. They ended up hiring me full time. And what I thought was just a developer was actually more than that. They were vertically integrated, so they were design, build, develop, and they really controlled properties end to end. So I had an awesome experience seeing properties from concept through delivery. And really, the volume of the work, most of the spend was in that construction phase. That's when you take the most risk. That's when you're managing the most money day to day. And so what I was learning day to day was a lot of construction management, which was new for me. I mean, I did not grow up around in the trades, didn't know anybody who did that, had really very little understanding of how a building's built, had hardly ever seen behind a wall before. And so it was a radical kind of new experience. I actually remember as a kid, my dad coming to me and saying, "Hey, could you go get me the Phillips screwdriver?" And I went to the tool drawer, looking at both screwdrivers, and had to come back to him and ask which one's Phillips. I mean, that's the kind of that's where I was coming from, starting as a teenager and into my 20s. But so it's been a rapid learning opportunity.
That's awesome. No, I couldn't agree more. And we'll dive into the more nuanced approach, because similar to you, I had no experience whatsoever in any type of construction, commercial real estate, or anything like that. And I still deem myself very much a novice in that space. But as you start as we mentioned, the commercial real estate industry has different verticals, and you kind of just run into these terms and definitions and stakeholders regardless of what project you ultimately decide to go on. So it's interesting.
It's limitless.
It's limitless, really.
Amount of information. And I think, the attitude you're describing about feeling you're a novice, not that you don't have self-confidence about it, but just feeling always curious and always feeling like you're willing to ask questions and never pretend that you know something you don't. That's a really critical skill and attitude, especially in construction management, where if you make mistakes, there are financial consequences to that. So it's always important to be open-minded and asking a ton of questions from everyone around you who knows more information.
Absolutely. We've thrown on the term construction management. For those who probably don't know the nuance of it, what would you kind of define? How would you define construction management at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, simply put, I think it's project management of any kind of capital expenditure that's going into a piece of real estate or an existing building, and it's just owning the process from permit, and you're legally allowed to make improvements through certificate of occupancy, and it's a specialized form of project management because there's a certain language to it. There's a certain process, certain hoops you have to jump through, and best practices that are specifically related to managing the risk and finances around construction phase. So,
Yeah.
and happy to dive more into that. But
Yeah. No.
to me, I think people or project managers in IT or other things, they have their own language, their own expertise, and construction is very similar. So unless you've been in it, you may not appreciate or know the specificity and some of the idiosyncratic kind of language and processes we have in construction.
Yeah, 100%. And I came from the software background, so I was in IT consulting and development for a while. So the way that we handle projects from the start to where we kind of roll out the software, again, there's certain steps in the process. Like you said, there's different vernacular that you have to know, and there's different stakeholders too that you have to understand how to interact with in order to make sure that you can get them to stay on track to be able to reach the project finish line in a timely manner. So I guess another question I had was related to what type of roles. So who are the players or the stakeholders typically in a construction project?
Yeah, I mean, obviously different projects will vary in their complexity and the type of people involved, but in general, there's just a small list of kind of immediate parties who are always a part of it, and that's the owner. I mean, the person who owns the property, whether it's a individual investor, a syndicated group of investors represented by a GP, or a corporate company who has a business interest and has a champion within that company, who owns that capital expenditure. There's always an owner, and that person is responsible for managing all the parties somehow, whether they do it themselves or through a third party by hiring, those services. There's usually a competent, licensed, and fully insured general contractor in a project that warrants the scale of a general contractor. There's always someone who is managing all the various trades and work streams to get the construction work done, because typically construction is highly segmented and subcontracted to a variety of different actors. I mean, you'll have dozens of different vendors under the umbrella of one general contractor. So the owner needs that person to manage the process coherently, because they can't speak to 36 different trade contractors, in an organized fashion. One, because they don't know how necessarily, but two, because they're running their business in whatever way, in addition to the construction project. So you got the owner, you got the builder, you got the trades underneath the builder. There's also always an architect or design team of some kind. So architect, engineering, and they are your tools and your resources to get the project designed. They are the experts in their respective subject areas, like mechanical, electrical, plumbing, design in general. And they will help you work through the regulatory process, the design process, to make sure the program of the building, the design of the building, meets your needs. And I think that kind of brings you to the last piece, which is the regulatory. There's always a body or a number of, we call them AHJs, authorities having jurisdiction in construction. So that might be a city government, a state government, whoever it is. They will permit the project, typically inspect the project at different intervals, and manage it from their end. So that's kind of the high level. I think I may have missed someone, but that's who comes to mind for me immediately.
That would be exactly what, if I were to kind of describe it at a high level, that's you're spot on that side. So I appreciate that. And obviously, as someone who is managing that project, you have to be able to coordinate with those different parties to make sure that everything is moving along. And obviously each party has their own specific role within the project, and they're going to have their own action items that need to be taken place. But, as someone like, you in your experience, it's a lot of times you need to wrangle people and, kind of keep on top of people to do
Right.
certain things when they need to get done. And so, that's obviously the skill set that you develop over time. And, so I guess one of the things that I'm curious about is, could you, once now that we've just defined kind of where the different stakeholders involved in these types of construction projects, what are the typical steps in the project timeline, from start, like you said, conceptualization to, getting your certificate of occupancy and opening for business or whatever, if the construction project is involved with leasing or whatever. But if you could kind of share that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, you have kind of pre-construction phase, construction phase, and then a closeout period that's the tail end of construction. So in the beginning, during pre-construction, broadly speaking, that could be as far back as when you are looking at doing site selection and trying to locate a place. Let's say you're a small business concept who's opening their third or fourth location. You're going to do like site feasibility and look at different options that brokers or other people are bringing you. You may hire construction-related professionals to help you analyze those sites, those opportunities, the pros, the cons, not just from a business perspective, but from a cost to improve perspective. Different sites have wildly different needs. So I think it starts there. Construction can start as early as that in your real estate search. But then you're that business, you land on a property. Well, now you're going to enter the design part of the pre-construction phase. You're going to hire your architect, your engineer, and work through, how does this place need to look to meet the needs of my operation, whatever it may be. If it's an office for your company, if it's a retail site that needs to operate a certain way, that's a really important step in the process, not something that you want to rush through. I think it can be easy to try to push through design and engineering, but the better and more clear you can get that on the front end, the less problems you'll have with coordination and risk on the back end. So that's a really critical part of the project. And then throughout that design phase, you engage with your various AHJ, your city, your county, whoever it is, and at different stages of the plan's completion, they'll review it. They'll give you comments, and you try to get your permits. That's assuming you're zoned and entitled and everything, from day one. And then you enter construction. That has many different phases to it. But it's typically kind of stage gated around the inspection processes that you have to do a certain amount of work to progress to the next tranche of work. And you monitor that through a critical path construction schedule. You can talk more about tools like that if you want. And then that wraps hopefully with your certificate of occupancy in the end. And then not to be overlooked is the closeout period, where you're getting all of your documentation, you're closing out all costs, making sure everyone's been paid, getting all the kind of lien waivers and things you need so there's no risk to you as the owner. And then warranties and owner and operation documentation. I mean, at the end of a project, you may get 1,000 paid, depending on the scale of the project. You could get binders and binders of information, digital or physical. And it's important to make sure that you do get all that, because there will be warranty issues and other things that you want to know on an ongoing basis. So all those are important in their own way and definitely all part of the process.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate the summary that you provided there. And now what I'd love to do is kind of dive into some of the challenges that you typically encounter throughout those periods. I'm actually going through the construction process right now on a small development we're taking on here in Louisville. And so we're actually actively going through the entitlement phase, where we're going to be rezoning a property, and we're near the tail end of that, but then we're going to start the process of engaging with GC. We've already selected our architect and engineer, so I'm actively in this process on the front end. So
Yeah.
It'd be nice to kind of get your perspective as you start progressing through those phases as to some of the challenges that you could potentially face. So maybe what we can talk about here is,
sounds like we could have a therapy session for the challenges that you're facing.
well, yeah, the therapy session. Well, so far, so it's not been too bad. I think the hardest thing really is just understanding the things you have to, the hoops you have to jump through, because a lot of times these aren't like, you do get and I don't know if it's the same way in Phoenix. I imagine it is, but if you're filing for a rezone, for example, usually you'll be assigned a case manager who kind of handles the process, at least doesn't handle the process.
Some kind of lead or touch point throughout.
Yeah, there's just a touch point for you to be able to speak to the different agencies you need to speak to in order to make sure that, you know, the plan moves along like it should. So, you know, understanding that process and understanding that as a case manager, they're kind of a disinterested third party. They're just kind of moving the paperwork, and they can share some insights, but they're not like your attorney who's going to be the one advocating for your site. So, you know, understanding that dynamic is something you got to kind of also understand. And, you know, obviously understand the timelines and the political piece that again, in entitlement, obviously we're talking about, you know, going through the entitlement process. So there's always political leanings involved based on what types of projects are coming to the area, whether or not the council member or the governing body for that area is support of that particular project. That adds another layer of complexity that you have to then contend with on the pre-construction side, even really before you can file for permits or anything like that. So
totally.
Yeah. So it's been fascinating so far. And, you know, that's kind of one of the reasons I want to talk about some of the challenges that you typically see along these timelines. So on the pre-construction side, obviously, as someone who manages the construction project, you've mentioned that you have the architect, you have the engineer, you have the GC. Now, and this is me and my limited understanding, but there's different construction methods, the way you can implement a project. It could be the GC hires the architect and then the engineer, and that's all handled in-house.
Totally.
You could then have, you know, you yourself manage the whole project, and you have a GC, you hire your own independent architect, and you hire the engineering firm as well to help with, you know, either the structural side or the MEP side as well. So I guess, you know, from a challenge perspective, in your experience, could you share some of the challenges that you've experienced in projects that you've been involved with or even taken on yourself? Because I know you had an awesome project you did over, I believe it was in Tallahassee when you were over there. You had a really cool project that you guys were working
some friends and I redeveloped a abandoned gas station.
Yeah, and it was super cool. I mean, if you guys haven't a chance to check it out, you know, I'm sure there's ways they can find out how the project itself. But I guess more so on the pre-construction phase, like what are some of the challenges that you typically see stakeholders face when they're taking on that process?
Yeah, I mean, every step of the way is rife with challenge. Like the one thing about project management in a real estate and construction sense is you really just have to be determined, and you have to know why you're doing it, have to have a vision for the end point, because there will be constant hurdles to overcome. But that's really the job. And the job is anticipating those as much as possible, to the point of your question, but then also just having the tenacity and kind of hard-headedness to push through the ones you can't anticipate, which will be quite often as well, happen all the time. But in a pre-construction phase, I mean, I've often felt that it seems like just getting to your permits sometimes feels like, well, now I'm just free to get the job done. It's almost like now I'm home free and I can just run. And that's not totally true, because construction has risks and frustrations and challenges to work through and manage. But it's such a huge milestone to get to that permit day. And in some jurisdictions, can take years, depending on if you're on the West Coast. The entitlement period for zoning and things, I mean, that could be years of work. So those are huge milestones. One thing I learned early on from a mentor, I worked for this guy, Lorenzo Perez from Venue Projects. And I remember we got permits on a job, and we were in a team meeting with everybody, architect, engineer, GC, and everyone's just talking about, okay, when are we going to start? What's the start date? Authorization to proceed. And he said, I just want everybody to take a deep breath. Let's look around the room. Let's just be excited that we hit this milestone. Let's celebrate this and take a moment to reflect on it. And he said, in this business, you have to celebrate the milestones, every single one, because that's what keeps you going to the next one. So that always resonated with me. That's something I'll never forget. And I talk to teams about that I'm involved in as well. But I think on pre-construction side, I mean, personalities are hard to personalities and politics have to be managed. It's really important to know how to talk to the different parties that are involved. Like, what are the interests and goals of those different parties, and how do you speak to them in a way that they receive what they need to hear. There's a guy in development who talks about feeding people what they need to eat. So, like, you feed the banker the information they need in the language they need it. You feed the city worker the information they need in the language that they need it. And so I do think it's really important to be intentional about that to help you get through the process. And you really need relationships to build relationships to help you do that, especially at those jurisdictions where you're going to work. It's really important to have long-term relationships because, I mean, you described a scenario where a staff person was disinterested and maybe not pushing your paperwork, but I've experienced where you can have a relationship and that person is not disinterested and they are a champion of your work. So that can happen as well, based on your track record and how you've treated people all along. But
yeah. No, I agree. I mean, no question about that. And, I do appreciate the fact that you mentioned the communication piece, because I feel like it doesn't solve all problems by any means, but I feel like communication and constant and clear communication with all parties, how they like to receive the communication, because the way you interact with someone, the way we interact may be different than the way we have to interact with someone else. Again, you kind of have to read the personality and understand what needs the stakeholders in this project value. So being able to kind of speak to that, but, being able to make sure that.
And even the method of how you talk to them is can be different per person, and you have to respond to, I wish everybody picked up the phone and called or answered a phone call, but not everyone does. Some people do. Some people text, some people respond via email. And so some of it is learning too, just how you communicate with people to get responses.
Sure.
That's something you have to learn as you go.
Definitely. No. So, obviously you talked about the pre-construction phase. You've created the designs, you've created the site plan, and you've done all the things that you need to do to get to the point where you can pull your permits. Now, the construction phase is typically going to be the longest, or maybe not, depending on how long it took you to get entitlements. But let's just say that the construction phase is definitely one of the more in-depth pieces of the process. Yep. So, how do you typically handle, number one, like checkpoints, timelines, and then holding the stakeholders accountable to get the things done that they need to get done? Because one of the challenges that, I can speak for myself, one of the challenges that I face is I don't have a very elaborate construction background. So, someone could tell me, hey, this is how it is, and there's really no way for me to know definitively that's the way it is, nor do I understand timelines and what things should cost and, other vernaculars like that. So, that also can create some issues with accountability, because I don't know what to, you have to expect what you inspect what you expect, but my expectations are here. Whereas, and not so like low expectations, I'm saying that I just don't understand the dynamics at play. So maybe if you could share some insights, that'd be great.
Yeah, once you have that permit and you're ready to rock and roll, it's really the general contractor's time to shine, and that's when they should be taking the lead, day to day, week to week, month to month, on managing the project. But it's important to have, I think, developed relationships with different GCs very early on, so that kind of know who you're going to competitively bid and select from. And you want to really vet those people for their background and track record. Their reputation really matters. Obviously, their financial health matters quite a bit too, in terms of risk to the project. But assuming you've done a stellar job of picking a stand-up GC, I'm working on a project now. Their GC's name happens to be stellar, and they're doing a really great job. But it's really them that lead that project day to day, because they're managing all that work in the field. And they're supposed to be managing the communication to you of what they need to advance the project and get it done. So they'll do that by requesting for information. They'll do that by putting out invoices. But it's really their job to produce a regular reoccurring schedule look ahead that you need, and then a budget and a month-to-month kind of plan of how the project's executed. And honestly, construction projects, I think, in terms of reoccurring tasks and things, it really is on a monthly cycle. A lot of the work that you do reoccurs once a month each month. So that might be a billing review and whatnot, but there's a lot of different things going on throughout the month, week to week as well.
That makes sense. Yeah. So and so another thing that I'm kind of curious about on that side regarding the management of because again, the GC, like you said, is going to be handling the day-to-day operations on the ground, making sure that the subcontractors are doing what they're supposed to do, inspecting the work to make sure it's done properly. You know, as you work through the construction project, you're gonna encounter stuff. It just is what it is. It's part of any type of any construction project is going to encounter that. So, you know, how do you manage, you know, in those types of issues that arise that would require maybe change orders or something else that would, you know, could affect not only the budget of the project, but potentially the timeline, the completion timeline?
Yeah. And a lot of people focus on budget or cost impact and not as much sometimes on schedule, and schedule can get away from you where suddenly you're on the back half of the schedule and 50% of the work is not done, right? So how does that match up? That's not making sense. But if you catch that too late, schedule impact can be much larger financially sometimes to a business or an operator than even change orders. So that's definitely a really important piece of handling that. I think the biggest thing to manage those risks, it starts in pre-construction. You know, everything begins with getting as clear and detailed an understanding of the scope of work as possible. So having really good detailed plans that don't have a lot of holes and gaps, that's really important. So that falls to having a great design team and vetting that, just like you vetted for your builder. And then having competent, whether they're in-house project managers or third party who can help, you vet for that if you don't have that expertise as an individual or as a business. But the reason why that's so important is because the scope of work that's in those documents, in those construction documents, and those design files, that becomes what the contract is written against. And that's will be what they reference and fall back on in large part in terms of what they owe you for the price that they gave you on the schedule they said they would do it within. So it's really important to have a thorough pre-construction and design phase to make sure scope is as ironed out as possible, but then also to have a really clear and itemized, we call it a RACI matrix, like a responsibilities matrix. And so that's something that will assign what every piece and part of the project is and who is responsible for it. So a lot of things in the construction phase will fall on the builder and will be under their contract. But there are maybe a number of things like specialized equipment, let's say, that is owner provided. And so they rely on, the builder will rely on the owner or other people to have inputs into their process. And each party becomes sort of contractually and financially responsible for those pieces of the puzzle. And if you don't deliver your piece on time and it impacts someone like the contractor, well, then suddenly they might be within their right to issue that change order or a schedule push. And they'll fall back on the fact that this wasn't in my contracted scope of work, objectively speaking, and you didn't deliver on your thing. So that's going to have an impact to you as the owner now. So it's really important to not have scope gaps and not have responsibility gaps. And that I think it's easy to skip over that. It's easy to think, oh, we're going to figure that out later, or to not have a really detailed and itemized sense of that information. But it's really important to do as much as possible on the front end. I've experienced that on any project I've ever been on. There's always some kind of scope gap, some unforeseen. You'll never anticipate everything. But if you don't do your best to anticipate the typical things, even, then that will come back, to bite you in the end. And usually once you're trucking and moving, if it's not clear and defined, that becomes really at risk for the owner. The builder's not going to take on a lot of things out of the goodwill and graciousness of their heart that they didn't have to. Some people do you favors, but there's a threshold of cost at which a favor is a lot more than just a favor. So.
No, 100%. Couldn't agree more. So, kind of going back to the beginning phase where you mentioned the contracts. So, obviously contracts become very important throughout this construction process as well. Because I'd imagine when not necessarily issues arise, but if obstacles are faced in some capacity, being able to reference the document that it explains who exactly is responsible for what and what the definition of roles and how to approach that particular problem, that's all through that piece of paper that you all have agreed to and signed to at the beginning of the project.
Yeah, that's a critical part, the contract negotiation. I mean, there's different types of contracts, whether it's AIA or there's the DBIA, design build. There are different flavors of generally the same type of thing, but they might favor different methodologies for how you deliver a project. Like you referenced that earlier, whether it's a design build job or a design bid build, that sort of thing. There's different contracts that reflect those structures, but yes, it's not just the contract itself, but really it's all of the addendums that the contract references, the set of plans, that racing matrix, like I mentioned, whatever it is that you've scoped out and defined to help make sense of what is the full scope of work and who is responsible for it and at what cost and on what timeline. Those all become addendum to that contract. And I think you're right. People will, if pushed into a corner or if put in a high stress situation, or if people can't come to reasonable agreement, day to day when there's issues, some people may find that they need to fall back on the contract. And it's unfortunate. I think some projects will have that moment where people kind of retreat into CYA and language or lawyer mode, where they're referencing that language and those contracts. Sometimes that's important because it's clear and objective. But hopefully things are clear enough and relationships are strong enough and people are collaborative enough that, that doesn't happen on your project, or only happens sparingly or in just really rational, non-emotional ways. You know what I mean?
No, 100%. No, I couldn't agree more. So we talked a little bit about, some of the challenges that you could face during the construction process. As you're starting to get closer to the finish line on the actual, opening day, let's say, or issuing the certificate of occupancies, what is the, I guess the process kind of leading up to that, as you're kind of wrapping things up?
Well, it's like a sprint. It's always a sprint to the finish. I'm in the current phase now of a project that I'm working on, that we've been working on for a couple of years in the Texas area in Dallas. We're building a new food processing and logistics hub for the corporate company I work for, Salad & Go. It's critical to our supply chain infrastructure. It's been a 2-year-long design build process where we've gone through all the different phases that we talked about, and we're 30 days out, from that certificate of occupancy. And at the end is always like this feverish, high pressure. I describe it as like a pressure cooker where people are in this thing together, the lid is shut, and you're really starting to bounce around off the walls on each other. And everyone has a million tasks that they have to deliver on. And then it becomes very clear every single day, like to what extent people are contingent upon each other's work and each other's tasks. So I think what's critical towards the end of a project is that the cadence of communication and meetings, they don't have to be long ones. Like we have a daily 15-minute stand-up that was instituted as we come to the end of a project. These sort of touch points become really critical on the end of a project to keep people in alignment and in constant communication. I think on the, in the beginning and the middle phase of a project, depending on what it is, you might not need that frequency of formal meetings. Typically, projects handled through a weekly, they call it an OAC, owner, architect, and contractor meeting on a weekly basis, where major issues are addressed or requests for information, RFIs are made known, that sort of thing. But yeah, towards the end, you really have to ramp up communication and really be in touch with each other and be gracious and understanding too of the stress that everyone is under. And I think it's important to be relational and empathetic in that phase, because I think that's a phase where people are at risk to stress out, get burnt out, that sort of thing. But man, once you hit the C of O, I mean, you have a punch list and things that need to get fixed and trimmed out and whatnot, but it's a huge pressure relief from that day forward. But the build up to that is immense, for sure.
Yeah. No, 100%. And like you said, I mean, you need everyone to be on board. So being able to kind of make sure that everyone is on the same page, and the empathy piece, I'm sure, is immense, because you don't want to get to a point where you're applying so much pressure to people to where some people decide they burn out, or they're not able to kind of perform their task because all these tasks are, or they don't respond to you, or you annoy them to the point where they just don't, like you said, just don't respond. So there's so many pieces of the puzzle that are interconnected that you got to really make sure that you're able to get.
It's funny because it's a duality to communication in construction. And I think one thing I've found difficult in my career is learning to balance it. I mean, my default is to be more empathetic, humane, etc., just as a person. And I think that emotional intelligence is really important, and it can go a long way. But also what I've learned is that in the duality of it, that you also have times where you have to be very direct and you have to be assertive. And that's definitely a skill that people have to learn to work on and gain confidence in. I know that I have. And working in the corporate context where I've been in the last couple of years has definitely helped me a lot with that. And I find that that's the side where it's just more rational, it's more objective, and it has to be factual and based in information. Like, no, you said you were going to do this by this day and you haven't. It's not personal. We can still go get beers after work if we need to, but you need to deliver on what you said so that the rest of the team can move forward. I mean, there are times when you have to be very direct, and I think it's important to do it in a way that's respectful and not doesn't create antagonism and friction in the team. But there will be times when there is disputes and very frank and direct conversation, and you have to be okay with that in a construction context.
Yeah. 100%. No. Oh, great. Yeah. The candid conversation, crucial conversations. I read a book recently. We're in a book club here locally. I like that. So it's a great book. But it talked about that exact same topic where it's, in order to get things done properly, and there's humane and professional ways to address these types of problems. But oftentimes, if you don't have candid conversations with people about certain things that need to get done, it creates all these ancillary problems, because now the resentment starts to build, or more stress starts to build because people don't understand what the expectations are. So by you not having those conversations, oftentimes it backfires. So just because you're either uncomfortable or maybe afraid to have those conversations because you don't know whether or not there's going to be confrontation from it, but at the end of the day, it's like those types of conversations oftentimes will alleviate so many more problems down the line if you're just willing to have them. And you're not going to be perfect when you start off, but over time, obviously, hopefully you'll improve.
100%. And any issue what I've learned too is any issue that you just leave unaddressed will come up later and will likely blow up later. There is no, you cannot hide anything in a construction project. You have to bring things to the surface because they will surface later. And if they surface later, they have financial and schedule consequences. And when that happens on these projects, because different parties are responsible and everyone has money at risk, that puts some people in a bad position as a business. And that's very stressful. So it's really important to get ahead of everything. And to your point, it relies on having crucial conversations, the confidence to do that, the assertiveness to bring things up even if you're unsure,
Mm-hmm.
of the technical or expertise aspects of it, to make sure that it's voiced and be willing to, there's someone at the contractor I'm working with now, who I like kind of the style of how he disarms people sometimes by saying like, well, this may be a very dumb question. I just want to ask the dumb question so we can talk about it. He's like self-deprecating in a way. He's like, well, I'm not an electrical engineer, but this comes to mind for me. What if this happened? Or what if do we need to talk about this? And sometimes it's like, yeah, that was kind of a dumb question. No, it's not really an issue. Other times it's like, there are no dumb questions because, I mean, we're just here to brainstorm, and that was a great point, But the way he delivers it too, he has the humbleness, humility to kind of bring it up, and he doesn't mind that he, quote unquote, looks like the uninformed person in the room. When in fact, because of his experience through all these different projects, he's highly informed. That's why he's bringing it up. You know what I mean? He may not know it to a technical level, but he knows that it needs to be discussed by the experts that are in that meeting together. And I think that is project management. I mean, that is managing a process to ensure that the subject matter experts are aligned, and that nothing is left, no stone is left unturned, I guess.
That's great. No, great insights there. So I was going to ask you one more question, then we're going to open up to Q&A because I know there's probably a lot of people out there that are interested in asking you specific questions. So if you guys are listening to this or watching this, there seems to be quite a few people on the call. Please go ahead and type away in the chat box with your questions. I'll make sure to get them answered as quickly as we can after this. But just wanted to kind of round it out, more so related to learning more about the industry and really the terminology to be able to kind of speak the lingo, as they say, outside, because obviously being in the business is probably the best way to learn the lingo, just because again you interact with it on a day-to-day. But even if you're in an ancillary profession, obviously we a lot of people who listen to this podcast are in the commercial real estate business, whether they're brokers or lenders or lawyers, etc., and they oftentimes will come across, or not necessarily come across, but they will there will run across the construction vernacular and really maybe even be involved in a construction project in some capacity. So I guess my question to you is, what do you think are some of the best ways or resources to learn about this type of this industry so that you can be a little bit more educated when it comes to future projects?
Yeah, I mean, so 100%, there's obviously no replacement for firsthand experience. And a lot of construction functions through this sort of history or tradition of an apprentice learns from the master and then graduates up. Whether it's a tradesman in the field, that's how the model that they have with an apprentice, journeyman, etc. Working in a construction management context, like at a general contractor, you always start at the bottom. You're a project engineer before you're assistant project manager, before you're a project manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a reason for that. And even the best ones will cross-train with people getting field supervision experience, but then also office kind of project management experience. But short of having that experience, I have to believe that, we live in a world of information. There's too many books. There's too many podcasts. There's too much YouTube information that this stuff is out there. There's a great community on Twitter, which became X, of commercial real estate and construction professionals. There's a number of people that we could put in the chat notes and whatnot. I mean, there's people to follow that just regularly just describe and tweet out amazing information, really insightful stuff based on firsthand experience. So I think it falls to somebody to just have the wherewithal to be curious. And you're never going to learn everything just by reading about it, but you certainly can get introduced to some of the concepts and terminology at a high level. And then short of that, maybe shadowing or just interviewing people in that space to learn more. Having a mentor in that space is always helpful too. So if you're not going to be a GC, but you want to be a developer, probably really important to have some GC friends who maybe you're not hiring them because maybe they work in a different asset class or something, but you need some kind of relational resources for sure. People that you can rely on to help vet things.
That's great. Yeah, that's why I have you as a friend.
Well, and same on brokerage side and all that stuff. I mean, I don't know that world at all, and so it's great to have people in my world that, like yourself, who that's their expertise.
Yeah. No, and I, like you said, I've learned, and I'll speak to this as a very inexperienced, this is taking on our first construction/development project. I'm very wet behind the ears, and oftentimes I will find myself contacting people that I know directly that are in the space to try to just gain, like you said, just ask the questions. And oftentimes, similar to the gentleman you referenced, I'll ask, hey, this may be a dumb question, but I just have
great,
a quick question regarding XYZ. And it is a very, unique way to approach the asking process, because it does disarm. It's very disarming, because at the end of the day, like, we're all here to learn. We're all here to kind of make sure that we're doing the things that we should be doing and doing things right. And if people see that you are genuinely curious and that you are willing to learn, because there's a lot of people out there that are overly confident about stuff and they think they know everything, and oftentimes those are the people that have issues down the road, because they overlook things that they don't consider because of the ego that comes into play. So making sure you're not putting yourself in that position by really just understanding that you don't know everything, and it's not a bad thing to ask the question. Defaulting to asking is usually a pretty good move.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, cool. Well, awesome, man. Well, I'll go ahead and let you guys type away in the chat box. In the meantime, if you guys have any specific questions, feel free to do that, and we'll make sure we get those questions answered. In the meantime, Lucas, I thought I'd ask you, this is kind of a question that I ask a lot of people that come on. Is there a question in particular, or maybe an idea that you wanted to share with the audience that maybe I didn't address through the questions that we just asked?
One thing I put a little time into thinking through was just sort of like, what are the right attributes for a construction manager, a project manager, a person that wants to be successful in this space. So I'd be happy to share some of those. But I mean, we touched on some of them. The most important one is communication. It's just so critical to be constantly communicating with everyone and be comfortable, learn to be comfortable with that. There's a quote by Jim Mattis, the former Marine 4-star general, and was a Department of Defense secretary. In one of his books on leadership, he says, always need to be asking yourself, what do I know? Who needs to know? And have I told them? And in construction, there's always this new information that comes up, or a problem or a risk, right? That you can't bury or you can't ignore. And it's just like, what did I learn today? Who do I need to talk to about it? And have I done it? And it's just all about follow through and consistency in doing that. And if you're successful in doing that, you're really, really, really going to go a long way, I think.
That's awesome.
And I found that to be so important.
Yeah. No, I mean, great insights to share for sure. All right. I'll check, let's check our Facebook. Let's see what's going on here.
So we're on Facebook.
Huh? Hey, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn. We've got, we're live on Instagram and
all the different
Twitter
platforms. That's great.
Oh yeah. And this platform's super cool. It's called I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's called StreamYard. So you're able to stream to a lot of different platforms all through one place. But all right. Well, cool. I guess we don't have any other questions. Well, Lucas, cool. I mean, obviously, I appreciate your insights. You're obviously a person I respect immensely, and I'm glad to be able to call you a friend. Because again, you've just been someone who is in particular on the the previous episode we had, and even with this episode, you always provide such great insights. And we'll be sure to include all the information for your information in the description as well, so people can access it. But if people wanted to get in touch with you and maybe just pick your brain on the process itself, obviously I know that you could literally have hours and hours and hours of discussion about the different nuances of this process. But if people wanted to learn more about what you're doing, or maybe just even reach out to ask a question, what's the best way to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think right now best way is either on X. I'm Urbanist with no A on there, but then LinkedIn. Really, honestly, I've been on LinkedIn the most lately. Lucas Lindsey, search for me. Construction manager, work at Salad and Go right now, and loving it there. It's a great company. A little plug to Salad and Go. We're opening a store a week all across the country. So
that's awesome.
Coming soon to a neighborhood corner near you.
Well, if you guys ever make it to this market, I mean, it's funny because we talked offline a little bit about how I hadn't seen it obviously in this market, and then I went back to Phoenix. I went to Phoenix like 2 or 3 times last year. Unfortunately, we weren't able to connect for whatever reason, but I saw Salad and Go everywhere. So it seems to be a very, very popular concept, and I know you guys are expanding very rapidly in Texas. So I'm sure.
Yeah, we are. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas soon, all over.
That's amazing. Well.
Yeah. It's a fun group of people and a great concept. I think it's going to be very disruptive to the fast food industry to have a healthier, affordable option.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I you can count me as a customer once you guys make it over here in this direction. But then we'll be sure to include all the information for Lucas in the show notes, kind of like what we did for his previous episode. So if you guys are watching this on YouTube, go ahead into the description. You'll be able to see that. And if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., you'll be able to access it as well through the description. So
awesome.
Again, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. We obviously appreciate the support, and we really, value you guys tuning in. Thank you, Lucas, again, for your time. It always is great to see you, and I'm always thankful for the insights that you're able to share. If you guys like this channel and you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It does make a big impact on our ability to reach a broader audience. And if you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, go ahead and leave a 5-star review. It makes a big impact in our ability to reach the broadest audience possible and educate people about the commercial real estate industry. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.